Since 1921, the Coterie of Social Workers Trinidad and Tobago Incorporated, a women's organization started by Audrey Lane Jeffers, Shakonia Medal Gold, and Order of the British Empire, has provided many social services. Best known are the school feeding programs, day nurseries, women hostels, and the introduction of Mother's Day and Universal Children's Day. This year, the Coterie has continued to initiate an annual Women Awareness webinar. The fourth webinar builds consciousness on aging. Aging Empowerment Series, navigating the journey to vitality, purpose, and well-being. These webinars will take place on Zoom every Wednesday, 6 to 8 p.m. from the 12th of June to the 10th of July 2024. Come and prepare yourself for this normal process that we will all experience. Explore the global aging agenda and our national responses, perceptions of the elderly and resulting risk factors, abuse of the elderly, health, finances, legal issues, social isolation experiences of persons as they get older, aging, the climate change, and the information era, caregiving and aging. Are you prepared? Empower yourself for the stage of life with vitality, purpose, and well-being.
Today we are conducting webinar 2, which means that there will be 3 more webinars before the end of this series. Webinars are being facilitated consecutively on Wednesdays, which means next week Wednesday will be webinar 3. A flyer and link to register for webinar 3 will also be placed in the chat at the end of this evening's webinar. Please click that link to register for webinar 3, and of course we invite you to share that link with your friends, family, network, and invite persons to come on for the next webinar as well. So now that we have the housekeeping items completed, let's move into the reason for all of us being here today. Webinar 2. This year's Women Aware webinar is themed Aging Empowerment Series, Navigating the Journey to Vitality, Purpose, and Well-Being. Last Wednesday, the foundation was set when Mrs. Crystal Oliver provided us with an overview of the global agenda on aging, and Dr. Samantha Thomas provided valuable information on national patterns and responses. Now that the context has been set, today we delve deeper into targeted issues pertaining to aging. These areas are health, social isolation, finance, and major legal concerns. The first 2 presenters will have 15 to 20 minutes for their presentations, and the final presenter will have 25 to 30 minutes for his presentation. So, without further delay, please allow me to introduce Dr. Heather Harewood, who will present on the first topic, health. Dr. Heather Harewood is a lecturer in public health and epidemiology and head of the public health group at the University of the West Indies, Cape Hill, Barbados. She is the coordinator of the Master of Public Health program and the UE PAHO postgraduate programs in health policy and health systems. Her research interests are health systems, based and aligned with her experience as a public health clinician and administrator. She uses qualitative and mixed methods approaches to examine maternal and child health issues, including breastfeeding, nutrition, and childhood obesity. Her research has also covered the COVID-19 experiences of elderly people living with type 2 diabetes and the experiences and perceptions of clients in accessing healthcare. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Heather Harewood, your first presenter for this evening. Dr. Harewood?
Thank you so much, Anika. So I'll just share my slides. So it is a pleasure to be here, and I thank you for the opportunity of being able to speak on this topic. So I smiled when I saw the topic because health is such a wide area. So I'm going to try to zone in on some things, and hopefully it will pique your interest and certainly generate some conversation as we go through the presentation this evening. So this is just an overview of what we'll be looking at today. I'm going to cover some key definitions and concepts, and I really do thank the preceding presenters last week who would have set a good foundation for this conversation. I'll look a bit at the global context with respect to aging, a bit about demographics. We'll look at the physiology of aging, the effects of aging, some of the psychosocial and the cure aspects of aging. But importantly, we're going to look to see what we can do to make our aging healthy as possible. And I'll bring the topic of palliative care because it's something that is not often understood in the correct manner as to how it can apply to us as we age. So I'm hoping this will be engaging for you, and I look forward to your questions. So just starting with some key definitions, there's a saying that as soon as you're born, you start to get old because nobody asks how young a baby is, how old is your baby? And essentially, aging really starts at the time of conception, but we look at it in terms of maturity and becoming a fully functioning adult. But as we speak about aging and looking towards older ages, there's a connotation that there's a loss of function, there's a decline in the person that we would have been in the prime of our lives. And aging is really occurring at a rapid rate within our societies. And it's a characteristic process that, results in a reduction in the physiological functions that are necessary for survival and fertility. And these occur over time. And it's important to distinguish aging itself as a process from the diseases that are associated with aging, which is to say that aging does not automatically mean that you will be, riddled with disease. And this is where we will pick up the topic healthy aging as we go forward a bit more. So within the context globally, we know that life expectancy is increasing, and this has been linked to a number of public health interventions. Living conditions have been improved. We've had access to potable water, to good sanitation, to better diets. At one point, our diets are shifting to the point where they're not so good, where there's a lot of ultra-processed foods, and that will be one of the things that we will consider as we look towards some of the steps towards achieving healthy aging. And one of the concerns, therefore, is that even though there's an increase in life expectancy, this has not necessarily resulted in an improvement or a maintenance of health into the extra years that we have gained. So whereas at the start of the 20th century, people may have been living like 65, 68 years, we're now living 77, 78 years, on average. Yes?
My apologies for interrupting, but I'm seeing persons saying in the chat that they're not hearing.
No?
So, yes, they're saying it's very low. So I don't know
if I do apologize. Okay.
Adjust your volume. Thank you.
Is this any better?
I am hearing you perfectly well. So maybe some persons can drop in the chat if they are hearing you better.
Is this better for everyone? Because, just let me know, please.
I'm seeing some persons saying perhaps if you use a headset that might help. Other persons saying hardly hearing. Some are saying that they're hearing perfectly well now. So perhaps we can proceed and see how it goes.
Okay, so I do apologize. So let's hope it remains good all the way through from this point forward. So I just wanted to make the point that in the global context, we've been living longer, but the challenge has been that living longer does not mean that we have a healthy extended life. And if you look at healthcare expenditure, a lot of expenditure in terms of complicated care, tertiary level care, does occur for people who are at the extended portion of the lifespan. So these are these are some of the things that we need to consider as we look towards healthy aging. How do we shift the needle, so to speak, to make healthy living a reality for more persons? It's important to also note, looking at it contextually, that aging is not a uniform process. People will age at different points. There are different physical changes that will occur, their behavioral changes, and then there are different cognitive manifestations that we associate with aging. So if we look globally, we will recognize, if we can compare some of the areas in the region of the world, that Latin America and the Caribbean expectancy is comparable with some of the other areas globally. And we've, as I said, noted these changes because of increase in public health activity. So we have had our immunization programs, and technically the Caribbean has actually led the global immunization programs in terms of our coverage for the so-called vaccine preventable diseases. We've had marked improvements in our sanitation. So we're not having as many people dying in the youth. They're proceeding to older age. And the challenge now, I think, for many governments, however, is that as our societies become more sophisticated and advanced, we're not having that replacement level of fertility. So one of the concerns is that as we look at our population pyramid, we're having a lot more of the older generation and not enough of younger people. So these are some of the things we need to take into consideration when we think about health. When governments invest in health, health now needs to be focused towards the diseases that are associated with an older population, the so-called degenerative diseases, such as, diabetes, hypertension, as opposed to things that would have affected an earlier or a younger population. So this just gives us some figures that tells us that in 2020, the number of people who were aged 60 years and older outnumber the children who were younger than 5 years, which supports the point I was making, that our pyramid is no longer a pyramid because the base is not bigger than the top anymore. There are more people in the older generations. And by 2050, it's estimated that 80% of older people will now be living in low and middle income countries. Or we can look at it in terms of small island developing states, because we know that even though we in the region might be described as high income, we do have some characteristics that make us vulnerable because of our open economies, our exposure to the hurricane season, for example. So we do have some of the challenges that would require us to think about how do we manage increasingly aging population, and also having the challenges that will arise because of our small island developing state vulnerability. So we can see that as the world ages, that there are a number of things that we have to think of from the health system's perspective. People will be retired, but they will spend many more years in a retirement. And even though most of the Caribbean islands do have a form of government-funded health systems, there are some things that are still paid for out of pocket. And we don't have a very strong voluntary health insurance base within the Caribbean. So for many people, being able to afford healthcare can become problematic as time progresses. So we just want to look a little bit at the physiology of aging. And just to put it in simple terms, we can think of it as accumulated, variable, and multiple types of wear and tear on our bodies over time. And this results in a gradual decrease in the physical and mental capacity of people. And there's a growing risk of disease as we get older, and we know ultimately, death will follow. But these changes, as we said, are not linear and they're not consistent, and it really only can be generalizable because there are some people who are 90 years old and their physical health is still quite good. Their mental capacity is still very sharp. And they are, they will go to doctors more so for wellness visits as opposed to being someone who might require a lot of care and attention. So this shows that, it is not a one size fits all when we think about the healthcare requirements for people. And I want us to use the public health definition of health. So health is not just the absence of disease, but when I speak of health, I'm speaking about the mental health, spiritual health, social health, everything that allows us to be able to function and to make a useful contribution to society. That is embodied in the public health definition of health. So we're looking at people who can still contribute to society. I think our theme song really embodied what older people can do. Old is the new young. And we know there's still a lot that we can gain from our older population as well. But we do see a diversity in terms of the way in which people will age. And it is thought that it can be broken down into two broad categories: internal factors, such as genetics and disease. And when we come to speak about dementia, the whole genetics conversation will come back up again. But we do know that, some families are more prone to, say, even premature signs of aging. Some people will go gray in their 40s, for example. And then there are people who might be in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and their heads are still primarily, the original color, no gray, or very few gray hairs are seen. Also, you may have some disease components that might hasten the process of aging. And then there are environmental factors or transitional activities within our societies that can influence the way in which we age, the quality of our aging. And this includes retirement. And are you retiring in a manner? Have you prepared for retirement? So are you able to enjoy the health care? Are you able to enjoy the sort of diet, the sorts of things that will promote healthy aging, to engage in social activities? Are you living in a housing setting that is appropriate for you? Because we recognize that as we get older, we will look at some of the specific characteristics of aging. Our joints might not take the wear and tear like before. Now, for example, does the housing that you're in accommodate, say, a ramp? Do you need to have assisted living, for example? And certainly we need to think about the psychosocial component of aging, because the older we get, we are less likely to have our friends or our peers, because eventually people start to die. And this is something that does impact on the psyche of older persons as well. So these are some of the things that we have to bear in mind when we're planning health services to look after our aging population. There are some things that we cannot modify. We can't modify genetics. We can try to intervene because some of the diseases are modifiable in terms of trying to put preventive services in place. We can also try to modify the environment. So, having discussions about retirement, having discussions about the sort of housing. Do you need to put in things to help you to be more functional at home, for example? And how do you cope with the death or the illness of partners and your friends? So these are some of the things, and I'm speaking from a public health perspective. So, it will not be highly clinical, but to look at the broad things that are required for us to create policies that promote healthy aging. So if you want to look at some of the physiology of aging, there are some general changes. I think we all appreciate that as we get older, we're no longer, so if our ID cards say that we're 5'6", our children might remind us, no, Mommy, you're no longer 5'6", you're more like 5'4", because over time, we get a bit of compression of the spine. The spine starts to curve. So that kyphosis just means a curvature of the spine. And we know that sometimes elderly people may have start to bend over a little bit more because the spine undergoes that curvature, and there are postural changes that occur as well. So people do look a little bit shorter, become a bit shorter as they get older. And if we compare the ratio of muscle mass, lean muscle mass, to fat, we know that over time, there tends to be a reduction in our muscle mass as well. There's also decreased sensory function. So for people who may also have this in combination with diabetes, you need to take care in terms of the sort of footwear that you use, because sometimes people may step on objects that damage their feet, the soles of their feet, but they're not aware because their sensory function has diminished. But we can think about sensory function also in terms of balance. So we do note that sometimes as people get older, they may have a bit more of a challenge maintaining their balance or their normal walking gait. And they may need to have some sort of assistive device, whether it's a cane, to help them to maintain that balance as well. And also being able to retain body water. So people will notice this particularly, say, in their skin. Sometimes the amount of saliva that's produced is not the same amount as when they were younger, because these changes do occur physiologically. And if you go on to look at some specific areas now, we can look at the hearing and look at the ears. So we're going to look at a few organs this evening. So hearing and balance. I don't know if we're all aware, but a lot of our balance is not just the sensation or the sensory aspect of our limbs, but we do have organs for balance within our ear. And sometimes as we get older and the blood supply to some of the end organs become compromised, we can have challenges in terms of those organs being functional as they would have been before. So we can get degenerative changes within the bones in the ear as well. And some older people do have challenges with perception of frequencies. So frequencies at the extreme, either high frequencies or low frequencies, may be more difficult for our older relatives to pick up. So, it does not make sense shouting or raising your voice sometimes because that does not improve the ability of an older person to hear. And some people start to get ringing in the ears where they may not have had it before. If you look at our vision, I think most of us recognize when we start to require some spectacles. And, if you look at the eyes in more details, the lens becomes thicker. So, we don't respond to changes in light in the same way. Some people may have a ring around their eye. It's like a whitish ring around the colored part of your eye, which we call the arcus senilis. But that does not necessarily cause any kind of, serious challenges with health and function. However, what happens though is that there's a decrease in depth perception. So you may find that elderly people become afraid to go down the stairs or to climb stairs because they can't quite make out how high to lift their leg to go up the different steps on a flight of stairs. So sometimes that can be a challenge then because caretakers might say, oh, they're being stubborn, but it's not that they're being stubborn per se. It might simply be that they're having some depth perception challenges, and we need to be aware of some of these things. And certainly we're all aware that visual acuity will fall off and hence we need the glasses to assist us. And then we think of our joints, so joint pains, arthritis, there can be deformities. So ideally we want to age healthy and be like these people here who can still do some exercises, but no matter the level of function, exercise will still improve the quality of life. So if you can't do full-on aerobics like this, aerobics can be done in a chair. So there are many options that can help people to remain physically fit. And I do remember my grandmother sitting in a chair and she would be raising her arms and doing her exercises. And, we used to, tease her sometimes because there was a song on the radio at the time called Granny Fit. We used to sing that while she was exercising. But as I got older and I got into medicine, I recognized that she was actually doing something which was quite good. And, now in the 21st century, people are making that their livelihood. So there are videos about chair aerobics or aerobics for people who might have problems with their gait. So it's important to recognize that being healthy can be modified. The steps to becoming healthy can be modified. A bit on the heart and lungs. We know that as we get older, our heart does not function as well as before, so we get what we call a reduced cardiac output. So every time the heart pumps, you don't get the quantity of blood that would have been released before. And this has implications then for getting blood pumped to the end organs. So then the kidneys, everything at the end of the bloodstream, so to speak, might have a bit of a compromise in terms of the quantity of blood. So the heart itself can also get affected. The heart rate does not respond the same way when we are stressed, and stress can be something good, it can be something bad, but typically our heart rate will go up because we're being prepared for fight or for flight. But that does not happen to the same extent in older people, and arteries get a lot thicker. So you can find then that, you're more likely to get stiffness and thickening of the arteries, and that will reduce the blood supply to the heart as well. If you think about our respiratory system, your lungs don't function as well, so it takes more effort to breathe in and to breathe out. And then on top of that, some people do develop what we call chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So they have a hard time actually exhaling, and the lungs become inflated, and it can become very difficult. And some people do need to go on oxygen. Well, we're also looking at the non-communicable diseases. I've mentioned cancer, mental health, and, the medication. I also want to mention diabetes, which is quite prevalent within our setting in the Caribbean. I mentioned medication because one of the challenges that happens is if you have several non-communicable diseases, so hypertension, diabetes, you may also have high cholesterol. Part of the challenge comes around then with having to take several different tablets, polypharmacy as we call it. And for some older people, that becomes a challenge in terms of remaining compliant with their regimen. There are also changes that occur in our skin. So the wrinkling that might occur, the loss of the sweat glands. So as we get older, we don't regulate heat as well as our younger counterparts because our sweat glands don't work as well. And our temperature regulation is a bit impaired. So sometimes you might find older people complaining they're hot, or they may, on the other hand, complain that they're cold. And as we think about climate change and the fact that the ambient temperatures are increasing, older people, for a number of reasons, are actually considered to be high risk, and we really need to, put things in place to advise people to drink appropriate amounts of water. For example, to avoid the heat of the day if it is possible to stay inside, because they do have challenges regulating their temperature and the skin gets thinner. And we recognize that older people will bruise more easily. There are a number of cancers that we're concerned about: breast for women, prostate for men. And I will mention colorectal cancer is becoming more prevalent within our societies in the Caribbean as well. The other point I want to make about cancers, though, and I will mention prostate and cervical in this context, that many of these cervical cancer, for example, we recommend that women get pap smears, sexually active, and you continue all through, into middle age and continue to get your pap smears done. And the irony is that this is something that allows us to pick up precancerous cells if done at the appropriate time. So it is unfortunate that many people still die from cervical cancer and prostate cancer because there's still a social stigma and taboo about these sort of tests that need to be done. So these are conversations that we need to have openly with our elders, that they still need to go and get the relevant tests done because it could help to preserve their lives. So just going to speak a bit about cognitive function. We know that as we get older, our brain actually decreases in size. The white matter or the processing part of our brain actually starts to get less or undergo atrophy, as we would say. And our motor reactions become, lessened over time because, the brain tells our bodies how to react, and there's a bit of a slowness that starts to develop. But again, we can recognize that and we can put things in place to help people. So, grab bars in the bathroom, things to help make us safer within our working environment, our home environments. And I can say working because some elderly people still are in the workforce because they may be consulting or they may be doing, things on a part-time basis. The other thing that happens, though, as we get older is that there's less sleep. Sleep tends to evade many older people. And, you need to think how to manage that so that people don't toss and turn. So they might need to think about a quiet activity that they can do until, there's this spirit of wakefulness, but sleep hygiene, making it a practice of, not having the TV on, not having blue lights, not having distracting things, maybe using music to help you get to sleep can be important to help improve the sleep hygiene. So I will just note the gastrointestinal things that would occur as well. We have less acid in our stomach, so we don't digest as well as we get older. And our taste buds, unfortunately, tend to diminish over time as well. So you might find that granny might like salty food, spicy food, and that becomes a challenge with managing the diabetes and the hypertension. Because the medical people are saying, don't add salt, don't add too much salt, don't add too much this. But, for them to actually appreciate the taste, they have to add more because of the pure taste buds. So again, counseling and helping people to, think about other ways to season food, looking at, garlic and herbs and other things to make the food tasty becomes important. And the other thing that occupies the concern of older people is the constipation, because we do get reduction in our intestinal mobility as well. In the urinary system, some of the challenges that can occur, particularly for men, would include prostate enlargement, but some women also experience urinary incontinence. So then you have to think about, how do you manage this? Do you need to get incontinence underwear? To help, so you can still live and function in a dignified way. So these are some discussions we must have. And certainly as we get older, our endocrine system, so our hormones can become dysfunctional. So many people, as they get older, do have a lowering of their thyroid hormones. So you might get a huskier voice. Hair might start to thin. You might notice a swelling in the neck. These are some of the things that happen. And certainly our immune system does not function as well. So if we cast our mind back to COVID-19, elderly people were considered high risk for a number of reasons. The immune system didn't function very well. Many of them had the concomitant NCDs like diabetes and hypertension, and therefore they would be considered at increased risk of developing COVID and having a bad outcome from COVID. I just want to make a note on dementia, because sometimes this word is used very, very loosely. And to know that dementia is not a specific disease, it's really a constellation of things that come together. But the important thing, it becomes disruptive to everyday life. So it is not really it's not considered a normal part of aging, because aging is meant to be a process. If we get older, we will die. eventually, but we're not, it's not meant for our cognitive function to be so disruptive that we can't function. And that is what happens with dementia. And the commonest cause is Alzheimer's that we're familiar with, but there are other types. And I just want to distinguish it from the normal age-related memory changes, such as occasionally misplacing car keys. I can raise my hand for that. We temporarily forget words, but we remember it a bit later. We might forget someone's name in a conversation, but we remember it later. And, this is normal. And we can still focus back on our experiences over time. We can still remember older memories. Our language remains intact. So it's important not to start to label somebody as having dementia simply because they might forget something temporarily. This is a diagnosis that really does need a doctor's assessment. And I think it's difficult because some of the things that characterize dementia, such as memory loss, will be common, but dementia will have other things related with it. So people might have difficulty communicating, they might lose the ability to reason very well, or their judgment might become impaired, and their visual perception might actually be a lot worse than you would expect for their given age. So it's a constellation of symptoms, as I said. And this is just to give us some ideas of the risk factors for dementia. Older people, 65 and older, if there's a family history, your mother, your dad, brother, or so first-degree relative who had dementia, you're more likely to have dementia as well. And African Americans, so this information is coming from the US, and this is an area for research in our region to find out if there's, what sort of ethnic diversity do we have in terms of the distribution of dementia within our population. But Afro-Americans are identified to be at higher risk compared to their white counterparts. And some of the underlying factors, so the same NCDs we spoke about, having hypertension, or some behavioral risk factors such as smoking, these are actually thought to be predispositions towards developing dementia. And some people, as you recognize, will have several things. They're older, there's a family history, they may have poorly controlled non-communicable diseases, they smoke as well, or they may have suffered a traumatic brain injury. So these are some of the things to bear in mind. These just tell us that these may signal dementia. You might forget, these are some things, you might forget old memories, but importantly, a medical assessment is what is required to make that definitive diagnosis, because often when labels are distributed inappropriately, we start to treat people differently as well. And that can have a deleterious effect on their mental health. So I'm cognizant of the time, so I'll try to wrap up the next few slides. But I just want to look at some of the psychosocial things quickly to know that for many people, losing active income, so you're on a pension, things are going up, prices are going up, but your salary, your pension is fixed. For some people, that causes a lot of psychological concern. They're concerned about falling into poverty, whereas you may have been a middle class civil servant. But over time, your purchasing power starts to fall off. Or you may have been able to have enjoyed, say, voluntary health insurance linked to your job, but you may have lost some of those benefits. So there's a sense of concern about poverty, dependency, and particularly we notice in our societies that the number of children are fewer. Some people don't have children at all. So then, if you're losing your friends, you've lost your spouse, there's a concern about who will look after me. How can I look after myself? So loneliness, depression, social isolation, which we'll hear about soon, will also be prevalent as part of the planning for healthy aging. So there's some dilemmas because, there's a loss of mobility, and sometimes the things that we use to help people to be cared for can be challenging for them. So, sometimes you have to restrain people when they're in a healthcare setting. And, sometimes people see that as an affront to their autonomy and their dignity. But it is a way of trying to help people from, getting falls that you want to avoid. So sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge. And also for people who are doing the caretaking, I just want to make a plug here for informal caregivers, because children, spouses often are the ones who end up looking after their relatives, and sometimes they're not prepared to help people transition into older adulthood and some of the challenges that occur. So part of healthy aging to me is not just about the person who's getting older, but incorporating the family. It's really an all of society approach if we go back to the UN Declaration about the decade of healthy aging. And I just want to speak a bit more about healthy aging to say it's a multifactorial process. So it requires a multidisciplinary approach. And we want people to be able to enjoy their golden years. So preventative services are relevant for older people. So they should, think about getting their blood pressure checked, their diabetes looked after, and so forth. Minimizing smoking and other habits that can be deleterious to health, and using seatbelts. And then there are things in terms of the psychosocial and cognitive aspects that become important, and it will highlight self-management of illness, because when people are able to take, I would say, responsibility and have a sense of ownership for their diseases, then that does help them to adhere better and to have more purpose in looking after themselves as well. Sometimes it can be a challenge with family members who think they need to do everything for older persons, but I think conversations must occur, because in all of this, I think the autonomy must be respected. And in the same way you will plan with a middle-aged person, you need to think about, what does my elderly parent or relative want in terms of me helping them to look after themselves as well. So these just give us these slides, next two slides, give us some ideas about some of the things that are important. So nutritional balance is important. And I have veggies with an asterisk just to make the point that not all vegetables are equal. So we want people to have a colorful plate. So don't just say pumpkin is your favorite vegetable, because things that have seeds, like pumpkins, beans, actually have a higher glycemic index. So for people who suffer from diabetes, if you eat mainly those and don't have the green leafy vegetables, which are more water-based as well, you might find that your blood sugar control might be off. So veggies, but everything must be done in an appropriate mix and in moderation. And I also have water. We are encouraged to drink water, and I made a point about climate change. So we do get more thirst, we perspire more. We need to replenish, but for people who have kidney impairment, they might have to be on a more restricted water intake. So again, discussions with the healthcare provider becomes relevant. Aerobic activity within the confines of your musculoskeletal ability. So for those who can still run, that is fine. My mother-in-law used to take part in the senior games in Barbados. So I used to say to people she was fitter than I was. But if it is just walking, you can do that's fine. Brisk walking is fine. Swimming is really great because it takes the effect of gravity off the joints. Muscle strengthening exercises become important, and it can be small dumbbells, it can be soup cans. You can sit and do these exercises as well. And then to help improve balance, Tai Chi, dancing. There are different things that can be done to help maintain, because we want to maintain the status that we're coming into old age with, and not to allow the deterioration that will make us become frail adults. So then there's social aspects. So people should take part in faith-based activities, because I mentioned that health also has a spiritual component. Recreational activities become important as well. And it should be part of the celebrations that go on in the household. So welcoming new family members, weddings, etc. These are some of the things we need to make sure that they're actively involved in. And then keeping the brain active, reading clubs, book clubs, having conversations, joining webinars, whether face-to-face or virtual, and put a little smiley face, because I'm hoping that there are many people on here today who will be considered maybe a little bit older, but recognize it's an important avenue to get information and to keep your brain active as well. And then activities like painting, and then there's the social media. There are some older people who are very adept with social media, going on YouTube, learning new things, and it's you're never too old to learn something new. So I just said we can look at shifting the needle. How do we make these additional years that are spent in better health than in poor health? And what becomes important is that we need to think about a supportive environment, starting within the home, looking at the healthcare system. So it should not be stigmatizing elderly people. It should be still allowing people to have some autonomy and input into their care where it is appropriate. And I just want to finish by speaking about palliative care, just to make the point, it is really meant to improve quality of life. It's not meaning that someone is going to die imminently, but we should prepare for death, in the sense that if we have a chronic disease, how do we look after ourselves in the best way possible to make the remaining years we have as healthy and fulfilling as possible? So relatives, family members are a part of the process, because again, having that supportive environment is important. You need to have early identification of any potential complications. And sometimes as diseases progress, people may have issues such as pain, constipation, depression. So the whole idea is to have a close alignment with your healthcare provider, identify these problems, and to have the appropriate measures put in place. But importantly, what palliative care does, it helps people to set and maintain their healthcare goals and experience dignity as they prepare for death while living as actively as possible. So it is an active process. It involves dietary and nutritional management, for example, self-care activities such as relaxation techniques, emotional and spiritual support. Support is also provided for family and caregivers because, as I said, a lot of what we do as caregiving in the Caribbean is informal caregiving, and we're not necessarily prepared for it. So palliative care interveners can actually help prepare family members to give care or to think about how they can bring in someone to assist with the care. And then also looking about wills and people's preferred place of death. There's some people who will say to you, if I'm sick, do not let me die in the hospital. So you can have those conversations. I had planned to just speak quickly about the study that I did, but what I will do, I will share the link with Monica, and you can read the paper. But this was the study we did with the elderly folk in the COVID-19 pandemic who were managing their diabetes. But to make the point that I think elderly people have.
Dr. Howard, are you back with us? I'm seeing you moving now.
Yes. Oh, I do apologize.
So go ahead. That's fine.
So I was coming to the end of the presentation. So I was just making the point that in the study that we did, looking at elderly people and how they managed their diabetes during COVID-19, when there were all of the restrictions, social isolation and so forth. Just to say that many people came up with, I would say, innovative ideas to look after their health. So they walked around the house, they met with friends, they used the phone, and they just demonstrated a lot of resilience, which does underscore the fact that as we age, we still have a lot to contribute to society, and younger people can learn from us as we get older. And if you will just permit me, I just want to share this last slide.
Definitely.
This is really just to show you my great aunt. She's now deceased, but she lived to 105. And she was still very, very independent, cooking for herself and doing everything else. So when I grew up, I wanted to be like her. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howard, for that very engaging and informative presentation. So many nuggets that shared. I just couldn't write any more on my paper that I may want to recap. I am very pleased to see your ending, because while you were speaking, I myself was thinking about someone in my community who died 2 weeks ago. She was actually 105 years old as well. And she was very vibrant. She went to church this Sunday and everything, take part in community activities, and she literally went to sleep and didn't wake back up. So her cause of death was just natural causes, because she had no ailments or anything. So I think we have the same goals. That's the goal.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you, Dr. Howard. And I know you all probably, the comments, the chat has been blowing up. I am noting your questions. I am noting your comments. And Dr. Howard shared such valuable information. Again, I cannot recap all of it, but it was very comprehensive. And I do want to say that at the end of this webinar series, we will make available videos that will be posted on the Coterie of Social Workers Trinidad and Tobago, Coterie of Social Workers Incorporated Trinidad and Tobago, Port of Spain branch YouTube channel. So the videos will be available at the end of the series, so you all can share them and review them at that time. We are a little over our time, so I do want to move directly into our other presentation. Your questions have been noted and they will be addressed at the end of all of the presentations. Dr. Howard spoke to the psychosocial impact, and she indicated we will discuss those things a little later on this evening, and it provides a good segue for us as we move into the next topic for this evening's proceedings, that of social isolation, which will be presented by Dr. Maria Gomes. Dr. Maria Therese Gomes is the proud mother and grandmother of 6. She has taught at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of the Southern Caribbean, the University of the West Indies, CUSTAT, and Howard University School of Social Work. A graduate of the London School of Economics and Political Science, Dr. Gomes was appointed as the first female chairperson of the Police Service Commission Trinidad and Tobago in 2015. With 25 years experience in social science delivery, adoption, family services, domestic violence, counseling, as well as working with community organizations. Dr. Gomes offers consultancy services in grant writing and project management. Her interest in Caribbean social development includes issues of transnational social work, diaspora relations, and comparative social development from a solution-focused approach. Her current goals focus on the holistic development of the adolescents and the elderly in communities, utilizing a value-based approach for social development of the society. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Maria Gomes, who will present on social isolation and aging. Dr. Gomes, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Are you all hearing me?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Not sure why you're not seeing me, but that's all right. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I couldn't do it before. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here this evening to share a few tidbits. Dr. Hayward was very comprehensive. Today is a holiday, it's Labor Day. I'm not planning to be this serious. I want to laugh a lot because I think that's a big part of social isolation, combating social isolation. All right. So, we will talk about the experiences of aging in terms of social isolation. And, is social isolation really something that is so bad? Right. So I would like us to look at finding balance and the issue of social isolation. Is this a bad thing? Or is it possibly a good thing? So what is our understanding of the concept of social isolation? And I'm hoping that we have a lot of interaction. I know it's all going to be at the end, but, note your questions and comments. What is our understanding of social isolation? Is it loneliness? Is it depression? Or maybe it's a comfortable state that I just want solitude. When I was asked to do this presentation, I thought to myself, good Lord, I will be talking about myself because I retired in January of this year. I'm no longer lecturing, which I enjoy doing, but I think it's time for me to shift gears. All right. My hair is not this gray. This is all color, but I am getting into that category and listening to Dr. Hayward. It was a little bit scary because I'm not anticipating being, having all those ailments, etc. So anyway, let's continue. So is it a comfortable state? Is social isolation a comfortable state? Or is it that we want some solitude sometimes, right? And it's all contextual. So are our brains wired for social interaction, social connectedness? Yes, it is. Our brains are wired because we are gregarious people. We love to interact, etc. And that's what keeps us going. As Dr. Hayward spoke about dementia, etc. I have that on another slide, but we will skip that. So what is our understanding of this concept of social isolation? Because we are associating it here with aging, but it could be social isolation for any age group, if we think about it. If we think about teenagers, if we think about the concept of and the context of what's happening in the society. So social isolation describes the quality and quantity of social interactions. All right. How are we going to measure this? We, as some of us are social workers, but we are people, persons providing social services, and we have some other persons viewing the webinar. So it is a lack of social connection. Social isolation is a lack of that social connection. It's a lack of connection with family, friends, etc. A lack of social support. And we become socially isolated either voluntarily, by choice, or by circumstances. How does context play a part in this notion of social isolation? So we had COVID in 2020, and we had COVID for a number of years. When it started, it was all fun and games. I remember I was lecturing, and first year students that we had, and I acknowledge that I've seen some of my past students here. The first year students did not know how to deal with the social isolation. So it is contextual, but in today's topic, we are dealing with the question of social isolation and the aging. So we have COVID. How did that affect persons who are aging? Right? How did it affect their family life, the quality of life, the family connections, the relationships, the life events? If, for instance, we are divorced, how does social isolation play that part? That context of, is this socially acceptable or not? Especially depending on our gender, how we identify our gender expression. All right, because for women, and I'm going to use myself as an example in a lot of this. For instance, during COVID, if I wanted to, let's say, go to some place, apartment and just get a cottage or something. I couldn't do anything like that because a female going alone, you can't do those things. Crime, again, I have that here as a public health issue. The issue of crime also plays a part where, okay, we get socially isolated, because of crime. If we think of the elderly, and I'm putting myself in that category now, I'm not 90 as yet, but if we put ourselves as people who are aging, as Dr. Hayward said, we're aging from the time we're born. This issue of crime makes us isolate ourselves because psychologically, crime is a public health issue and we are afraid to go outside. We might put more burglar proof in. We don't want to go out late. All the confines. We have the confines for you as younger people, far less for older folks. All right. With the home invasions of elderly communities, etc. Like where I live, it's an elderly community. It's established since 1960, 62. And so a lot of the persons are really elderly and isolated. So the public health issue of crime has not helped. And events like I said, divorce. What about death? Death of spouse, death of children, death of friends who you've had from, let's say, childhood or your secondary school friends. They start dying. They start getting ill. They start getting forgetful. The whole aging process is happening. Then, of course, migration. Whether it is internal migration and they're moving to another part of the island, or if it is that they're migrating abroad and going across the waters. So social isolation, if, for instance, you are living abroad and you are just decided, you know what, I've just retired, I am going to relocate in Canada. If I am not flexible enough, I can experience social isolation because I may not be able to acculturate and acclimatize to a new space. So that these life events then are contextual factors. And I'm sure you all can think of factors that play a part, contextual factors that play a part in social isolation in the elderly. Because, sometimes it is that I remember, for instance, when my mom was alive, the question of the aging process. She had Parkinson's, not very badly, but she decided at some point she was not going to church anymore, which was a place for her to socialize. But, sometimes we're not as empathetic as we can be. And so people might ask or wonder, how come she's looking like she's going down and there are whispers, etc. And she decided, okay, I'm not going anymore. So all these things are contextual factors that play a part in social isolation. So social isolation in that sense can be a matter of choice or by design. If circumstances, surrounding our aging process dictate that, look, we don't have caregivers, etc. We don't have close family connections, etc., and we've experienced death and dying of loved ones, that social isolation can take place. So when we are working with clients or even our relatives, we have to have that listening love. So love is a big part of the social isolation, right? We have to walk the talk. We can't just be talking about social isolation in a very theoretical sense, and not applying the things in life. And it takes a lot of courage and love to do that, because it means you're giving a part of yourself as somebody younger looking after or helping an elderly relative, etc. So, contributing factors to social isolation. As I said, loss of friends due to death, new illness, making social connections difficult, like the Parkinson's I talked about, or the question of diabetes, cancer coming on, all the different factors as our bodies, our physical body is declining. But emotionally, all right, emotionally and psychologically, we can maintain a certain degree of health in spite, because so much of things are controlled by how we think about it. All right. So caregiving responsibilities can be a contributing factor for social isolation. So for instance, again, using myself as an example, caregiving responsibilities. I would get lots of flyers coming up on my WhatsApp about different parties and events and so. And then somebody would call me after and say, but you sent this out and I didn't see you there. And I never even thought of it because I had on the blinders. I was in caregiving mode with my elderly mother and other relatives, other aunts and so. So caregiving responsibilities can cause us to isolate ourselves as the younger old person. And to clarify that, we could call it a sandwich generation. All right? You are not the elderly person. You're not in the 90s or maybe the 80s. All right? And you are not in the 50s. So you may be looking after younger folks, whether it is your children or your grandchildren, and you're looking after the elderly. So it's a sandwich situation. And that causes social isolation for people like myself. I've met a lot of lecturers on campus who have that dilemma. They're trying to get tenure, etc., and they are stuck in the sandwich. They're the sandwich generation. So caregiving responsibilities can cause us to isolate ourselves, social isolation. Traumatic events can also cause that social isolation for many of the elderly. Traumatic events like experiencing, a fall, having surgery, getting forgetful, losing loved ones, as I said, all these things. And one of the things is as well, losing your independence. Losing your independence can cause social isolation because you start to retreat. So social isolation, you start to get, a little bit quiet, depressed. But how do we know it's not just solitude you want and you are looking at developing your spirituality and you need that quiet moment? Or is it that you are isolating yourself because you feel that you are being judged? Judged by the other people around, judged by the people who you work with. So it's a very sensitive issue, this issue of social isolation. All right. And of course, the life changes. The life changes, that the physical life changes and other life changes that may happen. And we have the issue of okay, so all these physical health issues, I've just named a few here. The issue of diabetes, which is a lifestyle illness, the common ailments that we have in the society here. Hypertension, the heart ailments, and dementia. All right, all of these in terms of our cognitive factors. I have a friend who I share a birthday with. We're both born on the same day in May. And so we celebrate every year. She's 94. All right. Maybe I could turn it around and say I'm 49, but I'm not. Anyway, in terms of that issue of dementia. When I speak with her, she will ask me several times, every day, if I see her every day, so how many children does your son have again? And how much is this and whatever? And I answer like if she never asked me before. Because we have to have that quality of listening love when we're dealing with social isolation. All right. Whether it is imposed, we impose it on ourselves, we have to do the self talk. Or if it is that somebody's experiencing social isolation because, they're getting forgetful and, oh gosh, don't worry to talk to her because no. We can't do that. We have to be able to empathize. All right. So mental health wellness issues can cause social isolation as well. And extended periods of social isolation can be harmful to both you physically, mentally, and psychologically. I mentioned here neuroplasticity. There are a couple of videos on neuroplasticity. There's so many things out there on YouTube clips and particularly TED Talks that I would encourage you all to look at. For instance, neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to basically regenerate itself. And it offers a lot of hope for people who have dementia and other disabilities, because we can retool ourselves. For instance, occupational therapists help us to re-engineer ourselves if we've had a fall or if we've lost the fine motor skills. They help us do all those things in terms of eating again if we have a stroke, etc. So don't lose hope. If it is that you have clients or you experience it yourself or you have relatives, all right, we can regenerate. And so in terms of neuroplasticity, there's a good video on the nun research. All right, there were some nuns that they did research of who all lived in a convent and they're living in their hundreds because of the social connections and as well the physical things they do and the reading and the crocheting and using bicycles, to do exercise, etc. So the nervous system can change in terms of the intrinsic and extrinsic stimuli. And also you have people who, in terms of neuroplasticity, who are neurodivergent, who may have dyslexia, because neurodivergent is a new term. So we don't say handicapped, etc. All right. We talk about neurodivergence. So yes, social isolation can affect our mental health wellness because we may want to isolate ourselves. And this is where we as caregivers in our families and as professionals need to recognize these and be able to draw people out in little ways. In little ways we can show love, whether it is a telephone call, visiting the person, taking them to a show, taking them to the beach, doing things that they really would have loved to do. It forces you to go the extra mile. So balancing social isolation. How do we balance social isolation? We balance social isolation. This is my understanding of how I would balance social isolation, given all the context in terms of the research I've read, as well on a personal level. So I'm combining the personal and the political in that sense. So in terms of your individual values, what are your individual values towards the aging person? Is it that you think you may have to put them in a home because you do not have the ability to provide caregiving? But I would suggest if you could at all keep the elderly person in their home, or in an environment that is safe and you can interact with them, they live a longer life. If they have pets, etc., if you're taking them to a home and they have a pet, where does the pet go? It's a downward hill for that person because, mentally, they are going to recede and become isolated, all right, socially isolated. So your family values. In my family, for instance, when when my mother and her friends would all come online here, not just her friends, her family, because she was like the matriarch in the family. And when I'm coming through the front door, they are talking. What are they talking about? They're talking about all the ailments everybody has, and what are they doing about it. And I said one day, we cannot continue like this, because then I'm going to get old like this, sitting with them just talking about which ache and pain I have. So in terms of family values, a strong value of our family is celebrating life. So I made a big banner called Celebrating Life, and we started to walk the talk. My daughter is an occupational therapist, so between both of us, every other Wednesday, and it happened very organically. We invited them over for lunch, and this is just my mother's relatives, and then we started including her elderly friends. And so we would have a concert in the living room. We would have karaoke. They would do the catwalk. When it is Diwali, they dress up in Indian garb. We had lots of fun. All right. And so in terms of family values, people want to feel loved, want to feel needed. We had tea parties as well. We actually I have an uncle who died at 102. When he was 101, he came from Miami. He wanted to experience carnival because he's a carnival guy. And I have a video with him knocking bottle and spoon. We ended up turning it into a party. His birthday was around Valentine's, and anything to have fun and celebrate life. So family values, that is a strong value in our family. It may not happen with everybody, but in your own little ways, even with your clients, you can take your client to the mall if the family permits, so you can find ways to have games, right? Lots of board games, etc. If they like all fours, play all fours. All right. So one of the things for balancing social isolation, if you don't have all of that, what about the use of social media? Remember when during COVID, it was very, very difficult. That was a traumatic time because persons were isolated from attending the ritualistic things that we would have to celebrate life and to celebrate death. All right. When that same uncle of mine passed, a few months after he was here, we had the conga line going. All right. And we looked at the funeral, we had wine, everybody toasted him because he had a really long life, but we celebrated his life. How did we do it? Through social media. All right. We were on a Zoom chat and everybody talked and, made comments, and we sang, and I sang 1,000,001 hymns that they wanted to hear, but it helped to ease that question of social isolation. Because, I don't know if you all know this, but in terms of that age group who are in their 90s, that we have the millennials and the Z generation and X, and I'm not sure who's on the chat right now, which generation you belong to, but I think I'm in the baby boomers. But I remember looking up on the internet to see what was my mother's generation. And they were called, these are people in their 90s, they were called the silent generation. How were they called the silent? Well, why were they called the silent generation? Because they were in the World War time, right? The two World Wars. And therefore they had to keep quiet, when the siren is going off. And so they learned then to suppress feelings. And therefore, the social isolation is you could become more. You could also parallel it with that question of finding solitude and solace, because one of the family values and individual values is that of spirituality. How do we come to know God? How do we even have conversations with the elderly when they are going down, and you don't know how to ask those questions, those hard questions, when you are seeing them going down. They know they're coming to the end too, we could go before them, but instead of just leaving them alone in those thoughts, it causes us to pause and reflect on how we can very skillfully, with use of self and all your interviewing skills for persons who are, well, whether you're social workers or not, we all have skills in terms of how to raise, those hard questions. So social media is very useful, but it shouldn't be what you use alone, because people need that social, that connection, that energy, right? That feeling of a hug. They need that. So hugs are very important in terms of the aging. And for all of us, we need hugs because we all need to be loved. But for the aging, the hugging is very important as well, the feel of touch. Okay? So use of self. And I've talked about myself in and around the whole presentation. So I don't need to do that anymore. But learning how to manage life, I use a lot of pictures and plaques and great memories, and I use them in the work I do with clients. You know, I have one right here I'm looking at, and it just says, be still. That's a psalm. I'm reminded to be still because sometimes you need that solitude, not the social isolation, but the solitude of centering yourself and knowing what you need to do. Okay. And then this last one I will read here for you. I'll read two last ones, right? Life is not measured by the number of breaths we take, but by the moments that our breaths that take our breath away. Let me read it again. Life is not measured by the number of breaths we take, but by the moments that take our breath away. And that's how we want to live. So instead of thinking of, you know, that issue of social isolation must come along with aging, no, it doesn't have to. You could flip that script. All right? You could flip that script by showing love. And the last one I would say, I saw this and I bought this for myself. And it says, I've reached that age where my brain goes from, you probably shouldn't say that, to, what the hell? Let's see what happens. And that's how I'm living my life now as a retired person, because social isolation, I like the solitude. I like the peacefulness of going for a walk, going by the beach, etc., etc. I don't have to have company. But in terms of social isolation and all the attendant illnesses that can come along, I hope that I'm going to be very far away from that. So this is my presentation, but really and truly allowing life to unfold and having a deep spiritual connection with your maker. All right. So thank you very much. This is the last slide. So let me read it quickly. I'm slowly learning that even if I react, it won't change anything. It won't make people suddenly love and respect me. It won't magically change their minds. Sometimes it's better to just let things be. Let people go. Don't fight closure. Don't ask for explanations. Don't chase answers. And don't expect people to understand where you're coming from. I'm slowly learning that life is better lived when you don't center it on what's happening around you and center it on what is happening inside you instead. Work on yourself and your inner peace, and you'll come to realize that not reacting to every little thing that bothers you is the first ingredient to living a happy and healthy life. And I'm closing with that because all of us are in that aging process. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that this was very helpful in teaching you about the issue of social isolation and giving you a new spin on how to deal with the aging process for yourself so you don't fall into that trap of social isolation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gomes. Such an enlightening presentation, as Dr. Cummins stated, and so many other persons placed feedback in the chat as you were presenting. And I know that we were all engaged and taking in the information. Persons were putting their own experiences and perspectives as well. And I know that we have all been educated here today, and definitely we are all thinking about what do we need to do to ensure that we manage social isolation during this aging process. I want to also pause just to say happy belated 49th birthday to you. I know you said your birthday was in May. And do enjoy the rest of your year. And I think we can all learn from you besides the information and the wealth of knowledge you shared with us. You know, you spoke one thing I will just pick out briefly before we move into the next presenter would be you spoke about personal values and how you incorporate that, or your family would incorporate that to help mitigate this whole concern of social isolation. And I definitely think it's something all of us on this evening can adopt from you. So you shared celebrating life and how that really it's a team within your family. I'm sure many persons on will have their own values that they use to really stay connected. And I want to invite us to drop them in the chat because we can all learn from each other. I personally plan to ensure celebrating life becomes part of my routine with my family. So thank you so much for everything you shared. I wish I could recap all, but time again. I do need to move into our final presenter, and then we'll have a brief Q&A at the end because we are getting so much information. We are a little behind on our time this evening. So without further ado, I would want to move into our final presenter for today, Mr. Garth Thomas, who will focus on the topics of finance and major legal concerns. Mr. Thomas is a Hall of Fame member of two venerable institutions, the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors, and his alma mater, Trinity College, Mocha Maraval. Now, I know he's very excited about being associated with Trinity College, Mocha Maraval because it's in all caps for me, right? He is a past president of Dynamic Speakers Toastmasters Club, a past area director, and an advanced communicator Gold Toastmasters International. Garth has a keen interest in the concepts espoused in quantum theory as they relate to the nature of the universe as the field of all possibilities, where individual and organizational growth must take place. A believer in the awesomeness of the human potential, he sees himself as a human becoming, and his life mission is to become the best he can be by helping others to become the best they can be. We are certainly in for a treat with this evening's final presentation, and it is my pleasure to hand you over to Mr. Garth Thomas. Mr. Thomas?
A great evening to you all. And I must thank our two previous presenters. Their presentations were very stimulating, and it seems as if they nicely went into my presentation. So I start off with, I start off with this graphic. Now, this graphic is not a graphic about the brain, it is a graphic about the mind. And you will see that I have identified the mind, and my acrostic says, it's a magnificent, infinitely intelligent, nuclear-powered dynamo. I deliberately start my presentation with this because this thing that we call a mind is unquestionably our greatest asset as we face the challenges of aging. And both presenters made reference to it in their presentations. And I want you to pay particular attention to that because it's a resource that is underestimated. And I want to make a clear distinction between the brain and the mind, because very often people use the two interchangeably. But the brain is a physical organ. You know, if you cracked open my skull, you would find a physical organ inside of there coiled up. And it's the brain. And it has between 40 and 100 billion neurons. And we only use about, the most intelligent of us, people like Einstein, only use about 10% of our capacity of our brain. Now, the mind, on the other hand, has no physical matter to it. actually, the mind is a product of the brain. And Dr. Caroline Leaf, and I'm making real reference to some of her work. She has a number of books out. She's a neuroscientist, and she had a definition of the mind, which I thought was very useful. And she calls the mind an electromagnetic field that surrounds the body. An electromagnetic field. Now, you may not know it, but electromagnetism trumps gravity. We know that gravity is powerful, but electromagnetism trumps gravity by about 36 times the power of gravity. So that within each of us, there is a capacity to orchestrate our universe. And I want to present retirement in a new perspective. Retirement is very often regarded, and there are many good reasons for this. Retirement is normally regarded as a kind of a departure lounge experience. That is what the society has created for us. It is as if we have lived the most important part of our lives, and we're just in the departure lounge waiting for our flight to call. This is a very tragic and morbid perception of retirement, because as I see it, retirement is unquestionably, unavoidably, and quintessentially the best opportunity that we have for the richest experience of our lives. And I articulate it in that manner because it is important for us to have a correct perspective as we move into retirement. And the use of our minds is key toward articulating that perspective and holding that perspective in focus so that it influences our behavior as we move into this section of our lives. So I want you to pay particular attention to that. And I want you to think about the mind, because it is magnificent. It is infinitely intelligent. It is nuclear power, that is real power. And it's a dynamo, it is a generator of energy. So once we understand that, then I want us now to look at a template that I have created. And this is a wealth creation template. And the template is a very simple template, but it has as its foundation, and a key element of it is how we can mobilize our minds to change our lives and to enrich the experience of life that we encounter, regardless of whatever challenges there may be. Okay? So I have entitled the presentation relative to the wealth creation template. I've entitled it 3 critical lines. Yes? 3 critical lines. And the first line is the finish line. All right? Dr. Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, has promoted the idea of beginning with the end in mind. And that is about knowing where you want to go. All right? It is important. The planning process begins at the finish line. Now, very often people try to avoid the finish line, but the finish line is there. It ain't going nowhere. And you have the power, if you use your mind intelligently, to establish that finish line. And that finish line can do with your finances, if you want to limit it to that, but it can do as well with your whole retirement lifestyle. What is the kind of a lifestyle that you desire at your retirement. So the first line is the finish line. And the finish line is saying really that you should have a vision for yourself of how you want to live in retirement. And you know, the scripture says that without a vision, the people perish. And you are people. I am people, you are people. So you need to have a vision. And you need to recognize that this concept of the departure lounge is a very pervasive concept that is out there in our society. There seems to be a lot of evidence to support it, and people buy into it subconsciously. And that is the dangerous part. And we need to understand that we need to do some editing with the programs that run our bodies, because, you know, 90 to 95% of what we do every day occurs at the subconscious level. And therefore, we need to pay some attention to that, especially in the area of our finances, and especially in the area of the finances at the time of retirement. So that's the first line, the finish line. The second line is the starting line. Now, people tend to feel that things begin at the starting line, but the planning process doesn't begin at the starting line. It begins at the finish line. It begins with your identifying and have a clear vision of where you want to be. But then you come to the starting line, and the starting line is really about identifying the resources that are currently available to you. All right? Identifying the resources that are currently available to you, because you can only work with what you have. You cannot work with what you wish you had. You cannot work with what you hope you're going to get. You can only work with what you have. Now, the fact of the matter is that most people, the vast majority of people, do not make adequate plans for their retirement. That is a given. And even those who have been able to discipline themselves in terms of their spending, in terms of their management of money, who may have put aside, made provisions, financial provisions for their retirement, very often because of illness, because of changes in the economy, these people can find themselves that after all of the sacrifices they made to make sure that they have adequate resources, financial resources for their retirement, they may find themselves at sea because of things that occurred out of their control. So, regardless of what you have put in place, you need to have a vision of where you want to be in retirement, your finish line, and you need to be clear on what your current resources are. And your current resources fall into two categories: the tangibles and the intangibles. The tangibles, of course, the money that you have put aside, whatever property you may have acquired, all right, your clothes and cars and all of those other things, all right, cash in the bank, whatever investments you have made, all of these are the tangibles. Most people tend to look at these tangibles as being the essence of the resources that they need to have in order to retire successfully and happily. But I have news for you. The intangibles is where the action really is. Do you know actually that science has proven that over 99.9% of the universe is in the area of intangibles? You know, they call it space. You know, when we say space, people think of emptiness, but space is not empty. Space is teeming with networks of energy. And so you need to understand that the nature of the universe in which you live is one where energy trumps matter. Actually, Albert Einstein is quoted as saying that when it comes to energy, matter, we have been all wrong, because matter is really energy whose vibration has been lowered to be perceptible by the senses. All right? So really, it is not about matter, it is about energy. 0.1% of the universe is matter. So I have taken a position where I say, see, matter really doesn't matter. What matters is energy. And as I started out my presentation, I am showing you that the mind is energy. And that energy emanates from the brain, which is a database of information. And science shows how information generates energy. So if you want to edit the energy that is coming out of your brain, you have to edit the information that is going in. All right? So you have to look at these things and the intangibles. Your mind is an intangible. Your imagination is an intangible. And imagination, do you know how the dictionary that defines imagination? It is the ability of our minds to create pictures, images of things that we have never experienced or seen. All right? So we have a capacity, whenever I think about imagination, I think about Peter Minshall. Because Peter Minshall, every time you saw a Peter Minshall mass, it stretched your imagination. You couldn't believe that such things could happen. All right? And imagination is powerful. And if you are going to have a rich experience of retirement, you're going to need to be able to utilize your imagination, your mind. But another critical element in the intangibles are your relationships, your network of friends and colleagues. The quality of your relationships, major asset in terms of the resources that you have available to you, that you need to mobilize and you need to strategize as to how you can use these resources in a manner that will multiply effort. And that is in the financial world, we call that leverage. How to multiply effort by making certain alignments in the areas of your relationships and in the areas of the use of the financial resources that you have already put in place. So, tangibles and intangibles, identify your current resources. I want to encourage each of you to do a list. Make a list of, and the two headings are tangibles, one, and the second heading is intangibles. And write down all of the intangibles that you have, the talents that you have, the skills you have developed, the expertise, the relationships, and you keep going on down the road. And you will find that you have significant intangible assets. And by the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you how you can tap into these resources and how you can use them to enable you to get where you want to go, to have the experience that you desire, the lifestyle that you desire in your senior years. So let's go to the third line. The third line is the timeline. All right? Work expands to fill the time allocated to it. So here we have it. We have the finish line. We have the starting line. And we have linking them, the timeline. All right? You must time bind your activity. Because as most of us would have already experienced, time slips away so quickly and so easily, and it has to be managed. And one of the ways that we can manage it is when we establish a timeline. I tend to advocate a 10-year timeline, because whatever let us suppose your current situation is not an ideal situation. Let us suppose you have some debts. Let us suppose that the passive income that you have created for your retirement is running out. It's inadequate as expenses increase, as the price of goods and services increase, as inflation hits. All of these are challenges, financial challenges that we face at retirement. All right? So you want to say, how much money do I need to have? And how much time is available to me in order to get where I need to go financially. So we have the timeline. I am recommending 10 years. I'm saying that no matter what is your current situation, that if you apply the concepts identified in this wealth creation template, that you can be in 10 years' time, you can be exactly where you want to be in terms of the financial and as well the social aspects of your retirement experience. And you will have the money to do the things that you want to do, the money to take care of any health expenses that may crop up, because that is always a potential for retirement. So you want to put in place a template. What I'm giving to you there is primarily just a template. That means it's bare bones. And therefore, it means that you have some work to do in terms of fleshing out these bare bones and making it something that you can work with on a daily basis. Because, anytime your plan does not come down to things that you can do every day to move toward your goal, whether it's an inch at a time, they say inch by inch, life is a cinch. So your plan, I'm giving you the template, you have to flesh it out into a plan. And your plan should put you in a position where every day when you wake up, there are things that you have to do, which will move you toward your finish line. Yes? So let's go to the next slide. Yes? Hello. Okay. All right. Keep running. We keep running past that. Next one. Okay. Back up one slide, please. Yes. Okay. So once you have identified the finish line, where you want to get, you have looked at the resources that you have available to you right now to mobilize, to take you where you want to go. You have set the timeline. 10 years. Now, it could be a longer time, it could be a shorter time. I recommend 10 years because 10 years is a decent amount of time to work with. A shorter time is going to put you under real pressure, regardless of your circumstances, and a longer time is too far away. So work with 10 years. So having those three things in place, the question must now be asked, and this is the key toward your leveraging your mind power, your mind energy to create the future that you desire. The question must be asked repeatedly. The question, which is the key to idea generation, to stirring the imagination, and to mining the database of information contained in your brain in order to develop strategies for taking action. The question must be asked repeatedly and continually. And what is the question? Very, very simple question. Very easy to apply. How can I? How can I use the resources that are currently available to me in a manner that will allow me to get where I want to go within the time frame that I have set? Move it to the next slide, please. How can I achieve my desired objective within the time frame set? Using the resources currently available to me. That's the question. It's a question I cannot emphasize enough, that this is not a question you can ask yourself once or twice. You must ask this question, so even when you go asleep, the question is running in your subconscious. And your subconscious has the capacity to tap into the database of information that is in your brain, but it also has the ability to tap into the information in the universe outside of you. All right? And when you put that search engine, you're talking about Google, you put that search engine that you have within your skull, you put it to work, and it will, in no time, well, I can't tell you in no time, but it will deliver the goods. I have 5 more minutes. Onika? Wow.
Yes, you do. You see, we went through that time so quickly. And I put on my camera just to clue you in. Sorry for the interruption, but I would like to beg of the audience for an extra 5 minutes just for us to go through quickly at least one or two of the questions that were put. So you can go ahead and
All right, but I haven't treated with the wills and probate and stuff like that as yet. We probably have to do that in a different session.
Perhaps you can give us some main pointers, Mr. Thomas, that take away. Yes.
All right. So let me just finish the summary here. Asking yourself this question repeatedly is in fact putting the search engine of your mind to scan the database of your brain internally and the database of the universe externally to source the data required to create your selected goal. In addition, it serves to keep your goal in focus. It's the combination of energy and information, keeping your eye on the prize. So I hope that this template will be useful, and perhaps if further information is required, you all can contact me through Onika and the Coterie. All right. I had wanted to speak very briefly about the question of wills, but I want to refer you instead to a program on 91.1. Let me see if I have the details here. There is a program on 91.1 entitled Legal Desk. The program occurs on a Wednesday between 11 and 12. Now, there was no program on today because of the cricket. But as long as there isn't cricket interference, this program is a program called the Legal Desk on 91.1 FM. And it will, there's an attorney who is at that desk. His name is Colvin Blaze. And if you have legal questions surrounding wills and trust and stuff like that, he is a very competent person to deliver that. But first of all, but briefly, I just want to say that you need to have a will. Because if you don't have a will, you die intestate. If you die intestate, it means that you have left no instructions as to how your estate is to be distributed. And there's a court formula, and the people you leave behind, your beneficiaries, they will have to apply for letters of administration, which can be a long, tedious process. If you want to avoid that, a simple way of avoiding that is simply by having beneficiaries on your various accounts. Especially, I can tell you that in the Unit Trust Corporation, if you name a beneficiary, whatever money is in that account will be passed to the beneficiary without the need for a will being probated. All that has to be done is you present proof of death and your own identification proof, and that money can be paid the same day. A similar facility is available in credit unions. Up to $50,000 of credit union shares can be passed to a named beneficiary without the probate of a will. So there are some ways that you can bypass the intricacies and the long drawn out procedures that are normally attendant to the execution of a will. I also want to say that you should not name a human being as your executor. All right? You should name a legal person, i.e. like a firm or a trust company or some legal entity as the executor. Because if you name another human being, another person, that person can predecease you just before you die. They can die shortly after you die. In either case, the will no longer has an executor. So you have defeated the purpose of the will. So if you name a legal person as the executor of the will, you save yourself that problem. All right? There are a number of other things, that are attendant upon this, the whole will process and so on. But I think we are fresh out of time. But like I said, I give you the reference to go to 91.1 FM and Legal Desk, and you can contact the people running that, and all of your questions relative to wills and trust and beneficiaries and stuff will be properly answered by an attorney. Monica.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. Again, such insightful information. Thank you for even allowing us the opportunity to be able to chat those timelines initially so we can bring it all together and see how everything is interconnected. Definitely, I think what stayed with me is that question, how can I? So we really need to always be constantly thinking and putting things in place for our end goal, which of course, as you stated, will be putting things in place for our retirement. I'm seeing comments in the chat as usual. Patrice King is saying, love the infinite intangible. So we really appreciate your presentation. I know you had to go a little quickly at the end, but we do appreciate the information in terms of very critical that you stated, use a legal entity as an executor and not a person, because if that person dies before you, then you do not have an executor. So use, for example, a firm or a trust company, and I really hope that the audience will take that away. You also gave us some valuable information in terms of the program on 91.1. Correct me if it's the wrong station. Legal desk on Wednesdays between 11 and 12 11 a.m. to 12 midday. So please feel free to check it out for further information on this topic. But thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. So at this time, I do want to hand us over quickly to Miss Teresa Jackman, who will take us through the vote of thanks and announcement. So Miss Jackman, without further delay, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending the Women's Aware Webinar 2 session on the experience of aging and empowerment. I'm a member of the Port of Spain Coterie Social Workers. First to begin, let me acknowledge the President, Ms. Jennifer Pudge, and executives of the Coterie Social Workers, and our chairperson, Ms. Anna Batiste. In addition, I would like to express gratitude and appreciation to Coordinator Dr. Ines Cambridge, committee members, and technical staff for their commitment and hard work in making the webinar a success. On behalf of the Coterie Social Workers for Spain, I take this opportunity to say a heartfelt thank you to the 3 dynamic presenters for the outstanding, informative presentation offered free of charge, and most importantly, taking precious time from their busy schedule. The esteemed guest speakers were Dr. Heather Harewood, and she gave key definitions and concept of aging and the disease of global increase in life expectancy and how people age at different processes, reduction of infectious diseases, challenges in increasing aging population. Her presentation was effective, informative, and resourceful. Excellent nuggets of information. Secondly, we had Dr. Maria Therese Gomes presenting on social isolation, finding balance, looking at social connection, life events. Her contribution was very sobering to me in a personal way when she spoke about the different types of social isolations. But it went into so much this, I haven't bothered to go into it, but it was very informative, very inspiring, and it meant a lot to me personally. Thank you, Dr. Gomes. Not far from being a doctor, Mr. Garth Thomas, your expertise and finance and the mind concern were invigorating, impactful, with cherished information. For example, the preparation for retirement, which was reference to having a will and having a legal updated will and having a legal entity as the executor. this was something I didn't know about. So that was very informative. Although the time allotted was limited, the presenters took us to the depths and heights on the experiences of aging. Their knowledge was supported with slides, graphs, and research materials for ease and clarity. Words cannot express our deepest gratitude and sincere appreciation for the invaluable information and which they represented. May each of you be guided with wisdom and knowledge in your endeavors. Keep the light shining. Thank you. Well, there may be announcements about the evaluation forms to be filled, and the next webinar will be the third session will be held on the 26th of the 6th, 2024. The theme, ageism and its impact. Let us close by saying a word of prayer for a beautiful, inspiring evening. Father God, thanks for the gathering as we prepare for a restful and peaceful night rest. Protect us from harm and danger, and let your peace fill our hearts in Jesus' almighty name. Amen.
Aging Empowerment Series, navigating the journey to vitality, purpose, and well-being.